Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my channel, where I like to make audiobooks of various web novels. In this particular series we will be focusing on the web novel Forgotten Dungeon from the website Royal Road, and in this particular episode we will be doing chapters 21 to 25. I hope that you enjoy. Forgotten Dungeon, chapter 21. This world was seriously weird. Why? Well, somebody was eating my dungeon monsters. Wasn't this supposed to be the other way around? What the hell? Were rats even edible? Ever since they were born in the dungeon, weren't they stuffed with some weird magic mumbo-jumbo which would prevent them from consumption? The idea of feeding sentience felt pretty unpleasant, but my dungeon instincts were silent on this matter. What I remember from Brighton's speech was that he seemed to imply that the dungeons were created to help the sentient races, to keep them afloat, so to speak. As such, it would be illogical for the meat of their creations to be inedible, unless they were clearly poisonous, undead or otherwise construct-like. And I already knew that all of these themes I was going for in the long run. Adventurers eating my minions didn't matter. It was just a minor annoyance, and I guess that while I was changing my monsters to contain some type of poison or disease would probably please Gangria, and it surely would annoy the rest of the guards. So it was something that I couldn't do for right now, or at least not overtly so. A little fix here, and they should be okay. The balancing act felt quite tiring, but on the other hand, because of the adventurers, no, soldiers I guess, I was learning new things, which was never a bad thing, especially when listening to the hunters. Their explanation about the ecosystem really tickled my fancy. It would be rude to disappoint. Creating a unique plant to be eaten by massive herbivores. Then those herbivores being eaten by even sneaky predators, ever turning the wheel of life, which would gain power over time, in theory even without an upper limit. This was quite an idea for the next brawl. And yes, I managed to do it. All the dead people I absorbed, and the equipment, and the whole open yourself up to the world, thing pushed me towards the first dungeon core level. Which meant that I could dig, which my drones were already starting to do. The stairway down was already done in any ways. Of course, it was located in a false core room, which is a problem by itself. Was the mechanical core even detectable? My onyx core could easily be carried away, but it was by my minion's hands or some machine, where the false one with the wall was embedded in it. Yeah, another thing to experiment with later. I would begin to rush only when the adventurers' parties managed to reach the rattling warrens. No, a moment earlier, which didn't seem like a probability at the moment. Speaking of adventurers, they managed to gather their pioneering team that consisted of 2 rangers with dual daggers, I guess, and they were here from the frontline duty, or maybe trap disposal. Their Lunar Kingdom affiliation was pretty obvious at this point. And then there was a girl armed with a bow and a small boy with a grandiose staff, probably a healer or maybe a mage. Last and not least was a big green-skinned man with a 2-handed sword, and he was wearing chainmail with a rather plain helmet. Obviously, a warrior of some kind from the Gaynark Kingdom. His color was clearly off, but nobody in the team commented on it, so I didn't have any additional information besides his name, Gadaro. It kinda bugged me, but most of my focus was on the mage/healer, Callisto. I had plans for him after all. The party left the safety of the first room and delved further. Why did I decide to leave it empty? Was it some kind of instinct? Or years of RPG experience? You must gather your party before venturing forth and all that jazz. Their group, unlike the earlier scouts, were moving with left-hand rule, which meant that they would soon leave the twisted tunnels my drones had dug without any problems, which was unacceptable. To leave the first guest room without meeting the host? Nope. I nudged the decapitator in the right direction, and it slowly lumbered forth with a deceiving speed. They heard him right away and decided to avoid confrontation. Not gonna happen. It took a minute or two, but my monsters managed to catch up, and the traps managed by the rattlings were disabled instantly, which in it stopped nearby, while the ones with the adventurous way were instead prepared to catch them unaware. Sadly, their senses were too good. That and the constant surveillance of the 2 rangers. Nobody in the pit was skewered by the spears. Was my design simply too bad, uninspired, or was the knowledge just too good? I had to get a bigger sample of visitors to further decide, and maybe add a few more surprises. Anyways, they decided to make their stand in preparation. The traps around them were swiftly disarmed. Smart. As the decapitated blades peeked around the corner, I could hear shocked gasps. Nice reaction. One of them even screamed in indignation. Why is there a boss in the first room? The leader-like figure asked into thin air. For a moment, I was sure that somehow understood that I was sentient. But it would just seem to look like a cry of anger at a perceived injustice. Kadara, to the front, tried to block the blades. Gina hit it in the middle, with that fleshy growth there. Callisto, start casting and tell us when you are ready to attack. Ulysses, with me. The large green man grunted in confirmation and walked forward. Well, the two rangers shadowed his steps. Yet my attention was somewhere else entirely. It seemed like the young one was a mage, not a healer. Excellent. Just what I needed, especially because I still didn't crack the whole magic conundrum. How it worked, what was the exact rules, which trope was being used here. Chance, ruins, maybe some good old imagination. All of them? None. Was it just a deal with gathering energy and flowing through the world? Or was it even more complicated explanation? Maybe affinities were a thing for the mortals too. So many things to test. Thus, I decided to switch from passive entertainment to actively trying to kidnap the mage. Maybe one or two more people. Their meat shield looked pretty interesting, but I could only aim for the backline. Too bad. Maybe, next time, the analysis of the dead adventurers' bodies would be waiting for another time, and I have very much alive guests to entertain now. I took only a few seconds of melee warriors to charge ahead, locking blades with the abomination. It screamed loudly, startling not only its enemies, but me, too. I didn't know it was capable of making any sound, not to mention that. It was a strange roar, a combination of scratching metal and a deep, loud scream, which seemed vaguely human. It only added to the creepiness of the factor. 8 out of 10. However, the front line was stopped for only a moment, shaking their fear effect immediately, and their leader was the first to run forward, likely to show an example and raise morale. His blade, however, only bounced powerlessly off of the decapitator's body. A clang was heard, and he winced in pain, barely keeping a hold of his dagger. True to its name, the beast used one of its hands to swipe horizontally, but the half-elf was nimble enough to avoid the clumsy move. His partner, Ulysses, was it, reacted immediately, lunging forward in an attempt to cut down the monster leg. Once again, however, the material was made from proved impervious to damage. Only a small scratch was left. What was worst for them, it was already healing. And then the orc-like man waltzed forward, yelling and swearing while trying to smack down the monster with his sword. An overhead swing with a lot of momentum behind it. The Zweihander comically bounced back, and this time he elicited a reaction. Just not the one he expected, though. A large greyish tentacle sailed through and grabbed him on his arms, trying to drag him closer to the thirsty iron blades. The decapitator trembled with excitement, edges of his hands getting ever closer. The victim tried desperately to stop it, but he couldn't do much while being dragged. He even left skid marks on the floor. His companions reacted by focusing their attacks on the fleshy tentacle, much more tempting than the iron blades. As soon as the daggers pierced through the rough skin, it was forced to abandon its prey, screaming again in indignation. All the while, the bogle tried to pelt it with arrows. To no avail, may I say. They backed away for a moment, breathing heavily, and the boy mage was chanting something slowly under his breath. I could see fire gathering in his palms. Seeing that the mage was close to unleashing his spell, I pinged the squad of Libras, heading to them one-armed with a crackling mace, and to move even faster. The second team was composed of 5 rattling spear throws, and I gave them an order to intercept. And then a few things happened, one after another. 1. The rattling shot the mage. That was good. 2. The mage somehow managed to fire a spell on the decapitator in general direction. That was bad. 3. The spell melted a fair bit of the monster, forcing it to scream yet again and disabling 2 of its blades. Singed the green man. And that was good and bad. 4. The green man caught fire like a match. That was good and amusing. My squad of Libras stumbled out of the corridor, grabbing the mage, and that was good. 6. They was instantly spotted by the ranger, and that was bad. 7. The leader started screaming about the magey tech weapons, forbidden and forgotten cache. That was weird. 8. With an order in a language that I didn't understand, the remaining party members shot the mage and the burning man, and then they ran away. Disappointing. At the very least, I've got a certified mage to play around with. His body was in pristine condition, not counting the hole in his skull, and some holes in his arms and legs. Damn, these rattlings were merciless. There was also a strange orc-like man. The parts that didn't burn, bones mostly. Still, a prophet was a prophet. I wasn't going to complain much. End of chapter. Forgotten Dungeon, Chapter 22. Uno. The remaining adventurers ran away pretty much unimpeded. The creatures on site weren't exactly what you would call nimble, so catching them was impossible. I guess that meant one of the perks of being dexterous enough, like the rangers, was a higher survival rate. The mage and heavy-duty fighters had more staying power, but when everything went to hell, it was a thief or a rogue that escaped unharmed. Such was life. I asked the Libras to bring back the spoils of war, seeing as I couldn't exactly absorb the still alive mage, or rather, barely alive. The ranger arrows managed to deal a large amount of damage. Luckily, it wasn't enough to outright kill the boy. It somehow made me question this world. Was it hit points based? I had no indication of such a thing. But maybe it was because I was a dungeon core. Anyways, I tried to mend his wounds with a healthy dose of mana and ingenious use of duct tape, which in this situation works similarly to bandages. Yet, my knowledge of the human physiology wasn't really that good. I remembered a few tips from the National Geographic program that I'd seen on TV, and then was a bit more understanding gleaned from dissecting dead bodies. But no matter, what it didn't allow me to do was become an expert in saving lives. That was why I was considered the final effect satisfactory. The mage wasn't dead, he also wasn't completely here. I may or may not have broken something. In my defense, there was a hole in his brain. My duct tape mana had stopped the blood loss and saved his life. But at what cost? I admit, I wasn't a laughable situation. The guy represented the knowledge of the outside world, which I needed mostly because it wasn't as outdated as Daniel's. On that note, should I even call him a name? My analyze tells me that he was turned into a guardian, so maybe it would be better just to call him that. Who knows? Not like the person in question can answer. Bah! Since the creation was my decision, I'm going to just call him that, the Guardian. The Soul Hive Guardian was too complicated, and I would probably forget it too. Simple was always good. Back to the topic. I need to stop getting sidetracked. So, the human mage. I had a few ideas on how to check if his magic before or after death. But since Gangria told me about soul frequency was out of the question, my options were limited. For now, I settled on dragging his body towards the stone slab I erected in my fake core room. I kinda looked like a sacrificial altar once I saw it in the book. My intentions were much less grim though. It was a hospital bed prepared in the name of science. Too bad moving the patient through the dungeon took time. Because of that, I focused my attention back on the camp and the sentience that made it first room. Mostly because it was on fire. The people were screaming and fighting. One side was clearly winning. The ranger folk were killing off the heavily armored soldiers. There were only 7 of them left before. But even under the sudden attack, they managed to kill and maim at least a few of their opponents. It was clear that they didn't understand what was going on. Their confusion cries were enough to understand that. But the attackers were speaking in a language that I didn't understand. But their bloodlust was self-explanatory. I didn't care about the scuffle. I was just still wanted food for me. The shouts quietened with time, and the humans fell on the ground, while blood, guts, and broken weapons were quickly absorbed by me. With a curious thing that I could devour them only when the sentients left the vicinity. I wondered why, but once again, knowing the rules was enough for now. The test and understanding would come after I was safe. The half-elves already took care of the burning tents and watched as I greedily devoured their former companions, and then they scattered the small groups trying to gather water and food from the surroundings, which meant hunting mine rats and harvesting the bone lichen growing on the walls. The rattlings weren't taking it lying down, but the skirmishers seemed to be pretty much skewed towards the sentients. After all, rangers had a lot of experience with hunting wildlife, while my minions pretty much had only fought the undead. Not to mention that only the inexperienced younglings were being sent so far from the rattling warrens. Guarding the road to my core was important, and I was about to return to the false core when a conversation came to my mind, mostly because it was in a language that I could actually comprehend. 3 rangers sat near the entrance of the room, clearly guarding the way deeper into the dungeon. Was that really necessary? One of them asked while leaning on the wall. His green clothing and leather armor looked out of place on my silvery wildness. What do you mean? The second one asked lazily, while checking an arrow after arrow. He meticulously searched for damage, looking for every fletching, shaft, and arrowhead. You know, slaughtering the humans. Captain said it was necessary, and that's the only explanation that I need, answered the arrow guy, while the third silent ranger only nodded. But what we had done, interrupted the second ranger. What we had done, the warrior repeated his words while gulping heavily. What we had done may very well spark a war between the Ganon Kingdom. He turned his head down, contemplating. We're not really in a position to fight on two fronts. Only if one of our compatriots spills the beans, or if the dungeon manages to send the information outside. And they all looked at each other in silence, and then started laughing. Good one. The arrow-checking ranger smacked his companion on the back. It may be a forgotten dungeon, but remember they're still as stupid as the other ones. His white teeth were showing for the first time. The first ranger wiped off a tear. Yes, I know. I was just a jest. Still, we still have to make a dash for our lines, no matter what the consequences. His face turned serious. I'm not sure how many of us will survive the trip. Yet, we can't have it any other way. This information is just too important. I still can't believe it. He knocked on my hallway wall. It doesn't look that dangerous. Probably devoured a cache in one of the deeper levels. That's when the really bizarre stuff starts to appear. Not the problem now. The silent ranger spoke, surprising them both. Just do your job and don't complain. Yes, don't worry about us. Yep, it was just talk. The men stopped talking and I retracted my consciousness. Now that was very strange. Cache? Forgotten dungeon? Information? At least now I understand that they were leaving pretty much straight away, which would leave my entrance empty. And I wasn't about to let that chance slip by. But first, let's focus on my new captive. The team of Libras had already dragged him into the slab, and I made sure that it was pretty comfortable, at least as much as stone can be. And I even carved a small rose so that the blood could flow freely, and made chains to keep the patient in place, which were being used right now, and the clumsy undead fingers trying to fit the mage arms and legs in. With a grunt, I ordered the Libras back and started to grow my copper tentacles from the ceiling. Somehow, mechanical core being a vicinity allowed for better control and precision of the many instruments that hung down awaiting my input. For now, I used the hand-like parts to cuff the patient. It was probably unnecessary precaution, but it was better to be safe than sorry. The boy didn't even grumble, his wide-eyed stare coupled with a blank expression. His face was pale, arms and legs burned by fire, while the flesh and signs of something that looked like mana corrosion. His veins were turning an unhealthy blue, and slowly the color was creeping up and up. Note to self, don't use my mana duct tape on living beings. Second note to self, don't use it on non-living dungeon creatures. No time like the present. I first needed to figure out how the mana was behaving and when being used by a sentient. I already heard him chant, so that was out of the way. But his canals were using what point of focus? There was still a secret. Not for long, though. I touched the wires to his left and right hands, delicately, right? Just like that. Then, with a flick of my non-existent finger, I gathered the electrical mana in my core and sent it towards the copper wire network, precisely just above the fake core room. And then, with a great grace, I flushed it down his system, and the patient screamed. I disregarded it. And there were the patterns. Unlike real electricity, it seemed like the mana was circulating his body in a specific way, and dispersing in the middle of his chest, under the cartilage bones. Once more, scream! And the reaction was the same. Every bit of energy was being sucked towards the earlier designated point. I detached the left arm cable, attached it to the right leg. Power on, scream again, and time for a longer. Were his pain centers intact? No matter. Mana corrosion also speeded up, which was not good. Maybe 1 or 2 more tries before it expires. Damn. It was time to go with a bang. I detached all of my cables and decided to use a wire and spike on the end. A perfect conductor. I stabbed it into his chest, not deep, just 5 centimeters at most, and the patient only grunted and numbed from the earlier pain. Gathering mana, I took him over one last time. How was it that I didn't feel anything? Fire, I spoke in his mind, and the mage body convulsed on the slab, kept in place by the chains. Then, with a gasp, he half sat up, and his eyes piercing the ceiling, looking somewhere outside, somewhere far away. And then he crumbled back, leaving only his small body. It was short, but with a sweet experiment. Scientific parts had ended. Now it was time for butchery. At least I knew where to begin. End of chapter. Forgotten Dungeon, Chapter 23. Uno. The human mage was lying down on the stone bed that I had prepared earlier. The copper arms worked in unison with cutting the flesh, taking out the bones, and dissecting the organs. Under their tireless work, a clear picture appeared. Firstly, the mages were human. It was an answer that might have been taken for granted, but in a fantasy world, it wasn't so easy to tell. There were races which parasitized the population, adopting similar looks and lifestyles. The vampire I fought before was a perfect example. Thankfully, the mage wasn't one of these beings, and they were something completely different when comparing him to the other adventurers that died in my dungeon. He had a crystal core, not unlike me. It was smaller, more delicate, and the color was also different, not black but red, but it yet had seemed oddly familiar, like a cousin met with a family reunion. The gem was hidden under his cartilage, and it was in the place where all the magic had converged before. And promptly disappeared, of course. The question out of the way. Now, what was its purpose? I used Analyze uselessly to show only the question marks. I promptly sent a shock of mana through it and let the little thing devour it. No reaction, a miss again. Maybe it would work when joined with living flesh. I didn't have many choices, but a rattling should suffice. A small expenditure of mana and I summoned a new one of a fake core room, and it appeared out of thin air, standing 2 feet and sniffing in my conjured copper arms curiously. Not wasting any time, my artificial appendages moved, keeping it in place. The rattling squealed again, clearly panicked, while the blades created an appropriate incision in its chest. Not blood, since I heated them up before, and then, with precise movement, my arm stuffed the gem inside. A small amount of duct tape mana was spent at keeping it in place. For a moment, nothing happened, and then the creature quietened down, with checking its fresh scar. I sighed tiredly. It seemed that this was also a failure. Just as I was preparing myself to extract the gem, my experimental rattling began to squeal in pain, clawing at its chest. A moment later, it exploded in a shower of blood and guts. The red crystal remained strangely clean and gleaming smugly, a few wisps of steam surrounding it. Was it taunting me? In retaliation, I immediately attacked it with lightning, sending a jolt through the copper forces and burning the little thing. The red gem sucked it all up. A stalemate. A few more bolts to do nothing, so I decided to continue my work. Another rattling was summoned, only to share the fate of its predecessor. Only after the third one did I understand the difference. The gem could be safely transported as long as I didn't feed the mana beforehand. When running on empty, it somehow accepted a new host. Yes, the creature still squirmed in pain, but I somehow managed to keep it alive due to a generous shower of mana and plugging any leaks and parts with duct tape. In the end, the beast looked totally different from its ancestors. The feeling was only reinforced when I used Analyze. Lesser demonic iron frame rat. Beast-like dungeon creature, created from the basic iron rattling. From outside, it looks a lot less powerful than its cousin, and an iron-like skin and a similar physique. It is, however, faster, stronger than the iron rattlings, but not necessarily smarter. While on the outside defenseless, it can breathe fire and shoot fireballs out of its mouth. The integrated mana crystal in its body also allows its fire claws to spell to be cast on its allies. It has a pack mentality, a tendency to form tribal societies which will help the dungeon creatures in the vicinity defend their home. Will not breed naturally due to the demonic heritage, but a conversion to a normal rattling is possible. Natural evolutions available. Has a built-in mana conversion gland which allows it to roam corrupted wastelands without trouble. I didn't know where the demonic thing came from, but the purpose of the crystal seemed clearer now. It allowed the mage to gather and use mana, or maybe even it did it for him? But what was weird was if he had such a trump card hidden, or should I say such a cheat, why wasn't he any stronger? And how did it end up inside him? Was he born like that? Or was it implanted? Maybe it was a genetic trait. If yes, then nobles being particular about their partner really made sense. And yet, something didn't add up. These chants too. But to research them, I would need to hear much, much more, which meant the investigator had to wait until more adventurers came. At least, I kinda now understood how to make my own special monsters. The main problem was the fact that even after absorbing the Iron Flame Rat, I only learned how to make the creature, not the gem. It was something inherently similar to me, and because of that hard to replicate. Just like the creation of another core wasn't a walk in the park. The real one, I mean, not my substitute. But I had an inkling, considering that the guy had a fire mage class and his gem was red color. Yep, maybe, but just considering mana hard enough would create something similar. But then it wasn't going to work with just bits of thin air. I had to have some sort of material, a condenser, maybe some kind of metal would work. The harder, the better, and that had to survive the exposure to my mana after all, which meant that I had to check the remains of the adventurers. At least I could use the material menu for once. What did they bring? Current resources availability. Common hardwood, common softwood, common iron, wrought cast. Uncommon meteoric iron, uncommon black iron, common silver, common gold, common copper, common tin, common nickel, common zinc, uncommon meteoric nickel, dirt, limestone, sandstone, flint, meat, grey rat, cow, human, and half-elf. Leather, grey rat, cow, and boar. Cotton, bone, grey rat, human, half-elf. Common feathers, plant matter, grass, grains, and mushrooms. Common tobacco leaves. I hated this stuff. I knew I was talking about I would it and it happens before, but to tell the truth, the migraine also happened. It wasn't like using a calculator. My own brain, or whatever I was using to think, was being worked to the bone instead. The result was a huge headache and a semi-workable list of resources. Well, less complaining and more experimenting. 2 of these were looking quite good, black iron and meteoric iron, not to mention their uncommon quality. Instead of choosing one, I decided to experiment on both, spawning a piece of already processed metal in a fake core room. Meteoric iron looked just like a similar cousin, with the grey wisps from some weird energy floating above it, otherwise unremarkable. Black iron was, like its name suggested, black, and it was also a bit more malleable than its meteoric counterpart. At least my mana conductivity seemed to be a little higher. Both pieces were left on the bloody altar with the only furniture in the room. The mage body had already been absorbed, yet the stone slab remained bloodied. Shouldn't it disappear? Curious, I analyzed it and whistled in wonder. Bloody sacrificial altar. This rock slab is spontaneous creation of the dungeon. Because of the abhorrent sacrifices that would be used on it, the remaining mana, pain, and pieces of emotions transferred to the chunk of stone into a magic tool. While not condoned by modern mages, the creation of tools in this way is often referred to as black magic. The creators of these items are unanimously pursued by the civilized nations and frowned upon by the many fallen tribes. Effect: once blood spilled on the room, all living creatures gain bloodlust and lose control unless they resist the effect. Spilled blood can be used to enhance the heal the guardian if it is good enough quality. Reading the description, I didn't know. Should I be happy or horrified by my accidental creation? At least, the part of it being pursued hasn't applied to me. Still, it had me a bit of synergy with the guardian and the mechanical core being in the same room. The only thing in my dungeon that could be afflicted by bloodlust were rattlings. And what was bloodlust specifically? I would have to check later. Now was not the time. I needed all my focus to condense my mana. At least I think I know how it worked. Since mana was something like gas, the condensation forced it into a liquid state, which meant the metal should absorb it all? That was a lot of should piled up into one another. Oh well, that's what experimenting is for. Fire away, I shouted, while seeing a small little rattling in goggles intruding into my experiment and getting promptly electrocuted. What the hell? End of chapter. Forgotten Dungeon, chapter 23.5. Lonesome. Crafter, one of the secret council, somewhere in the rattling tunnels. The rat in question was currently very, very angry. These guys, these damn rats, they dared to send his materials and mechanic and scientist. He had a dire need for those ores, yet all the metal and wood harvested by the scout teams were being used and wasted on strange experiments, or even worse, turned into pretty useless machines. Because of the catastrophe, here he was, sulking in the darkness at the end of the deepest tunnel, near the stairs towards the lowest level. What was worse was nobody on the council considered him important enough to assign some rat trainees to the poor crafter, and the bodies were something abundant in the burrow. Yes, it was not because he was useless, or so they said. Your time will come, in the future, they lied. Oh, these cold stairs, how they did hurt. He felt them, even now, even when squirming alone. No, Crafter, we can't have you making armor. Wasting all, the ratlings can easily use their metal hides to defend, they say. He squealed in indignation. And what about the underbelly, I say? What about it? No, Crafter, there isn't any enemy who can do that. His small paws hit the ground in anger. Yet there isn't one yet, you fools. Be prepared in the future. His squeals echoed in the tunnels, scaring the lesser ratlings into submission. The ordinary rats ran away, while hard to not see the raging Secret Council member. There was, after all, nothing good from being caught in the power struggles, especially when considering the Crafter faction was currently getting short end of the stick. No, Crafter, the angry rat continued to monologue. We can't have you wasting metal on weapons, and our hands are not yet agile enough to wield them. And our fangs are not strong enough to tear through enemies. He stopped again, gathering his thoughts and breath. And then he continued, and that's why I said to make claw weapons, you deranged fools. Or even spiked armor. Better spears, goggles. They added one thing after another in a quieter and quieter voice. And then he had another breath and continued. But no, Crafter, there is no need for tools. We can't use shovels or pickaxes or hammers or pliers or lamps. Our claws are strong and our arms tireless. He stopped in place and stared out the wall where he hit his head, and his beady eyes soon turned teary. Why nobody listens to me? Has the Creator abandoned his child? He asked in the darkness, stifling the rats that his words of heresy. The Creator was, after all, their God. As he wailed in self-pity, something changed. The tunnels were soaked in a strange presence. It was a feeling that he knew well. The Creator was on the move. Maybe trying another experiment or ordering some minions to do their job. Watching him is dangerous, but also profitable. Last time he had dumped a whole load of sentience into the dungeon entrance. Earlier, he fought with the Undying One, and even before that, he uncovered the Big Dark One and the Undead. Yeah, it was more dangerous than profitable, but still, rats in a situation like these didn't have much choice. Knowing that Crafter clenched his jaws and ran on all fours, traversing the tunnel in order to get close to the source of the disturbance. It took him a few minutes to arrive. Thankfully, none of his brothers got wind of the Creator's experiments, so the spoils would be his and his alone. Crafter stared down from the perch high up in the wall, and it was designed off shooting points, thankfully, the tactician's instruction. It also was perfectly hidden observation platform, and the guardian room beneath seemed the same as before, bearing a stone slab dumped in a black blood still dripping from it. Crafter wondered what was the source of it and why the Creator didn't devour it clean. After all, blood was one of the tastiest parts of sentience to be had. He blinked and the ratling appeared in the room, and it blinked again and said rattling exploded in a shower of guts and gore. Was the Creator angry for my earlier blasphemy? He asked himself in terror, only to see another rat disintegrated. Each time, however, a red spear was left in its place, taunting him. This Crafter will give his life, his claws for the soul, for you. Grand Creator, please, avert your wrath from the ratlings. I am alone am to blame. He intoned quietly, trying to ask for forgiveness. The Creator was a great power, but there were a ruinous part to it, the destruction it brought. He trembled in fear. But soon the show had ended, and the Creator seemingly satisfied with a random rattling sacrifice. Crafter made sure that his future cursing was to be kept at a minimum, and he needed to risk his master's wrath once again. It all ended with the red rat appeared, twisting in pain due to the Creator's intervention. It stared at the Crafter, seemingly begging for help, but disappeared from sight soon after. Before he could process the change, 2 pieces of metal appeared, and by the Creator, they were magnificent. Crafter stared at them greedily, nervously returning his goggles to their positions, and the right in the transgression, but surely the Creator would not mind giving these ores to him. Yes, it was divine grace after all, a reward. For what? Crafter didn't know, but they were just there, so easily grabbed, so shiny. With a rush of courage that he had never knew that he had before, a small ratling desperately ran into the safe zone, the tunnels quickly disappearing from his back, and his form was meager, thin, and with only distinguishing feature being a pair of goggles stuck to his nose, and the most importantly, a lack of spear thrower that all the lesser rats bore on their backs, or all as members of the Secret Council did. The creator noticed him almost immediately. This, however, didn't distract the young ratling in slightest, as he was moving towards the sweet metals just lying in the open. It was then the disaster struck. A bolt of energy descended from the ceiling, striking him down. The pain struck heavily. Can't move, it squealed in despair. Forgive me, creator, he continued, now understanding that it was all a test, and he had failed. As Crafter's senses started fading to black, and he felt strange, reinvigorating energy filling his body, and the creator's attention turned to him completely, which was never good. In silence, he felt the presence turn shocked, then pitying, amused, and in the end simply curious, which was even more not so good. The creator waited, looking intently at the ratling. Forgetting his earlier confessions, the crafter stared at the metal ores with a desire visible in his snout. Slowly, he started inching closer and closer to them. Amusement and curiosity of the creator peaked when the rat grabbed him, and it started to run away. He was, of course, caught and dragged back for the mercy once again. Sadly, his master wasn't privy to the secret rattling language. It all seemed like a random squealing to him, something that was unimaginable to a rat. And thus the energy struck again, and the crafter's eyes and his beady eyes awaited death. And this time, however, the target was creator was different, and the rattling was safe. Instead, the ores were soaking in something that looked like blue energy, and they started shining too. The shiny things were very much liked by the rats. The slowly one thanks you, creator, for the bounty freely given. The crafter lowered his head, now the greatest zealot of them all. Not because of the shinies, no. The creator only watched in amusement as the rat dragged back the now magical ores towards the tunnel. He would show them the armored rat, the warrior amongst warriors. He spotted one of the scrawnier, ordinary ratlings. Crafter's spirit returned. Come with me, he laughed at the other rat in dismay. Don't worry, you and I. We will create a better future for the ratlings. Saying so, he moved deeper into the tunnels, dragging the poor creature behind him. The new minion could only more or less calmly accept his fate. All while the creator was continuing his experiments. End of chapter. Forgotten Dungeon, chapter 24. Uno. The little rat scuttled away and took 2 pieces of ore. I already used the lightning energy on these, yet somehow achieving the effect similar to mana crystals that still eluded me. I accepted giving them away since it was clear to me that this ratling was a disabled specimen. Without working spear thrower, its usefulness to the colony would be minimal. Because of that, the rat was probably abandoned and was wandering the tunnels all alone. Its face, while it was cry for a human, had an unmistakable and sad expression carved into it, one that was the result of many disappointments. I simply felt pity and wished it could continue its experience, no matter how hard it was. Live on, little ratling. Sigh. Returning to the problem at hand, what did I manage to accomplish? Not much. I produced something called energized metal, which exhibited a strange visual effect, blue motes of light, but nothing else, and I could immediately use. The name changed, adding another word, and ultimately a long designation. Meteoric iron turned into energized meteoric iron, while black iron changed into energized black iron. What were the effects? Special characteristics? Who knows? My analyze didn't provide any answers, only question marks everywhere. It was not so useful now, I guess. For it to work with a target, there would need to be a creature or a magic tool. That begged another question. From where were all the knowledge coming from? And was it something connected to Gangria? She had sent something about the system. Whatever, let's focus on the present. The new metal wasn't completely useless, since few of the Libras seemed to be due for an upgrade, and I decided to duct tape plates of this to the front of their back. And the new armor was born. Who knew if it was better or worse than before? And who knew if it even works? Not me. That's what made it an interesting experiment. These new Libras were also promptly dumped into the food hall. This way, the adventurers advancing into the complex would first encounter the normal type Libras, only then the blue ones. Why did I not annihilate all of them at once? I was still mimicking a normal stupid dungeons, which did things according to pre-programmed motions. Slowly raising the difficulty levels was one of these. Of course, the decapitator kinda went against that notion, but I was banking on being unique and all that jazz. Going out of the way to destroy the invaders would break my cover though. At least, I think so. The whole dilemma annoys me. Let's get back to the experiments on the uncommon metals. They soothe my soul. and the next step in the process I decided not to only use my anima, but also my electrical affinity. Yet the final product was less than satisfactory. The damn thing was still not alive. Or rather, I ended up with something looking like a wet metal, which pretty much instantly hardens and exposed to air, creating pieces of iron. Wait, did I just create solder for the use of soldering iron? Or maybe superglue? Fit the bill if they were cause problems in delivering the said product, but my copper arms were pretty versatile, and the glue pistol for the solder iron wasn't out of the question. Or maybe I'll just upgrade them with cast iron, and it could also be a good enough material. It turned out that I had another tool added to my arsenal, except that it was pretty useless. My mana, the anima, and the electricity were able to somehow act as a bonding agent when without the solder-like substance. It was redundant. That was the word. Another failure then. I was getting more and more angry at the fact that there was no way to get a red crystal back from the iron flame rattling. It was such a unique thing, and I simply wasted it. Really, fate had cast its pearls before the swine. Why I couldn't just butcher the rat and retrieve it, mostly because the insides no longer contained the red crystal. It enhanced the final product, a rattling, and becoming one with the body, dissolving. I ended with only the ability to produce the creature, but no mana crystal which allowed its evolution. Not that it was an easy task to devour and reproduce it in the first place. My ability to deconstruct was limited to the things that were either already dead or those that were never alive in the first place. And far away from sentience, that too seemed to be a condition. And yes, it was none of these things, so I screwed up. But as soon as the more adventurers would grace my halls with their presence, let's just say I would await my bountiful harvest. Oh, yes, adventurers. They were trying to run, right? I changed my focus immediately, but not before summoning a few iron flame rats and throwing them into the rattling warrens. There was some kind of combination, but I really moved my conscience away. Running away from my problems. Nope, just the strategic relocation. Nothing to see here. Anyways, the adventurers were preparing to leave. A large team, about 30 people or so. I was tempted to block the entrance and devour them all, but managed to stop my impulses in time. One survivor would be enough to ruin my perfect image. No need to be impatient. More will come. The half-elves were busy packing. Not even a trace of blood remained of their former companions, so the room looked pristine. They gathered whatever mortar my bone lichen did produce and cured the rat meat. Most of them looked nervous, constantly readying their weapons and checking fletchings and lasting damage. In a few minutes, a smallish-looking half-elf with a young face stood up upon the improvised platform. His name was Ricker, I think. Everybody called him Captain, though. As he appeared, a slow murmur of voices quietened down, and the people started to listen. There was no impatience in their movements now, only focused attention. Ricker coughed and slowly took out a long look. His eyes were piercing blue and focused on them, each and every one of them. Under his gaze, the ranger stiffened up, courage and confidence surging. After a minute of silence, he started to speak. Brothers and sisters, rangers, defenders of Luna, a great duty lies upon our shoulders, a knowledge that we must share with the rest of the world. That mustn't be forgotten. He breathed in and out, presence sharp like an arrow in flight. Many of you will soon breathe your last, and many more will find the end in the Badlands. The murmurs started. Every single ranger was suddenly aware of their mortality. However, Rico, her voice stopped their hesitation. We will be remembered. We will save our friends and lovers, our families, he continued quietly. The information about this dungeon will save lives. The Forgotten Dungeon is a danger to all, ever so more in the hands of the reckless humans, arrogant elves, or mad dwarves. We must deliver the message to the council. One survivor will be enough. So run, run, and remember, it must be destroyed. The people around him cheered, chanting, "It must be destroyed." Well, I was processing the whole speech. Wait a moment. What the hell, man? What did I ever do to you? Crap, the situation was looking really bad. No choice and no time for hesitation. Libres advanced, Decapitator, get out of these tunnels and mow them down. Quickly, before they all march into the orderly fashion and leave the dungeon. Just like that. Frick. Now what? Did I just screw up? Again? The rangers were long gone when my warriors arrived at the entrance. For some reason, my whole existence was unforgivable to these people. Who knows why? And they would even murder their companions for that reason. And they only gladly lose their lives in order to make sure that the information, what information I don't understand, will reach the right places. It was bad. Really bad. Who knows how much time I have? But not all was lost. I had a plan. Well, parts of one. Firstly, I was blind, and when it came to the entrance, unacceptable. It was something white and circular above the stairs, but trying to extend my feelers out there ended in failure, each time. But that, as they say, was using a hammer to make every problem look like a nail. If something wasn't working the first time of change, I decided to slowly tighten my entrance, adding dungeon influences to the equation. And the result was a smaller way in, and its circular was now about 2 meters high in diameter, and a chance I was aiming for. While the dirt wasn't enough to create a normal-sized tunnel, a rattling one was still okay. Straight to the surface and then back into the ground, but still above the invisible barrier, stopping me from expanding upwards. Lovely. Since I remembered the rattlings were able to survive beyond my dungeon limits, and the levers on my own creations did not, they were the only choice for scouting the defense mission. Not the sturdiest of walls, not the brightest, but it will do. Not to mention I didn't really have the ability to give them orders or back intel the way they went inside. Who cares? It was for survival. Immediately the rattling queen and a few basic rats, all 3 iron flames, were summoned to the entrance room. As they appeared, a simple command was all that I managed, something that I had worked on in the future. Because of that, I asked the group to go to the surface, create a nest, and defend both the entrance from sentients. Yet somehow I think that they heard a bit more hardcore version of it. Something like, "Go forth, breed my name, create a nation and devour my enemies, leave none alive." The reaction was enthusiasm, and was a bit of an indication. I was not taking any responsibility for their future actions. Nope, not my business. I was busy surviving after all. And digging in the second level of the dungeon, which was currently being flooded due to underground lake my drones had found. Never a dull moment, huh? End of chapter. Forgotten Dungeon, Chapter 25. Uno. The die had been cast, rattlings already ran towards the surface, and what happens, happens. Hopefully they adapt and overcome. On that topic, my vision outside of the dungeon was non-existent. Maybe I should start developing a mobile version of my eye cameras. The tunnels certainly have enough space to easily include wires needed for that. Then again, I saw an eyeball staring at me. While I was taking a walk, my first thought would be to destroy the damn thing, and since most of my creations were more or less accidental, and recreating the camera was less terrifying flair, would probably take a lot of time to get right. Not to mention that while underground they're hidden from sight and the born of lichen patches. That I would have to think about different camouflage when considering the surfaces. Yet all I could come up with was a tree with an eye like fruits, which would be somewhat unnatural, and not to mention the creepy as hell. Not worth it. At least, not while my second level was getting submerged. How did that happen? Well, my plan for the second floor was simple. Long hallway, about 20 meters, leading southeast towards the large room in the middle, which then would be branched into 4 cardinal directions, at least cardinal according to my sense of north and south, since I still didn't have any magnetized metals to create a compass. And while I'd used electricity to create them, there was another problem. Did this world even have magnetic poles? Anyways, the main room was similar to the Colosseum in design, filled with the floor with sand covering in stone, adding a high ceiling and generously sprinkling the fauna and flora that I had access to, with the priority given to the non-lethal kind. Because of both the silver ironbark and the slender axe conifers were all used as wall supports, while knife bushes spread out far and wide, hiding rattling tunnels entrances here and there. Besides, the bone ferns and the copper grass covered every flat surface, creating a wine-brown carpet, yet due to high humidity, the said grass was already turning green. Despite being plant of its behavior, was still influenced by the type of metal that it was created from. Curious. And said humidity came from the stream flowing through the middle of the western tunnel, which was only dig site on this level. For now, I was after the follower concentrating strength and doctrine. The entrance was slowly being submerged and spilling out water towards the central room. Its depth was already spanning about 20 centimeters and was rising fast. I hurried into the tunnel and soon managed to see the crux of the problem. A large hole spewing out a blue liquid at high pressure. The drones tried to patch it up the resulting damage, but there was Sisyphean work. Due to my material form, I was able to see easily and not stopped by something like dirt or water. What greeted me on the other side was darkness. Upon further inspection, it was obvious that the lake, cistern, or whatever else it could have lacked of any sources of light on account of being underground and all of that. So I did the only thing I could. Floating upwards, soon the air replaced by water. Levitating above the surface allowed me to summon an electrical spark, which in turn brightened my surroundings. I could see at last. In the end, what greeted me was nothing interesting. A neatly serpentine underground lake with a mini waterfall situated on my right. The way the stream entered this place was placed about a meter above the current water table and closed, dripping down more water just a few meters away from my position. Since the whole cave seemed hermetically sealed before, with no additional rooms present, it was logical conclusion that there should be an exit too. And since I shouldn't see right away, there was a high chance it was located underwater. That in turn meant that until the water level stabilized, my problem with flooding wouldn't go away, which was quite bad. The plants would probably survive underwater for some time. The Libras and drones were safe too, but ultimately most of my flora would end up dead. I returned to the dungeon proper and ordered the drones to dig a ditch in the middle of the tunnel. It naturally gathered the water sloshing about and guiding it towards the main room. In the remaining drones were asked to dig down, creating an artificial pond in the middle. What went on after that was a race between my diligent minions and the endless water pouring in. I added the challenge by creating a few Libras, first ones on the floor, and directing them to bash down the wall separating the dungeon from the lake. They managed to do it pretty quickly, and only 3 of them ended up being swept by the currents. Good enough. This, however, also meant that even more workers were redirected towards the new frontier. Well, it was more like they had anything better to do. Hours flew by and the pond grew deeper and deeper, making it impossible to escape from. Motions of drones grew sluggish and wide underwater, but being inanimate and without the need to breathe made them surprisingly durable, even when continuing the screwing task. In these few hours, pretty much all the water had been drained out into the pond, slowly stabilizing the water table between the two environments. I laughed to myself, seeing that my nightmare of being turned into an underwater dungeon was averted. I could theoretically do it, sure, yet somehow this idea made me cringe on a cellular level. Maybe it was my affinity to speaking, maybe something else, who knows. There was another thing that I was thinking about, namely, I was craving fish. Not for any gourmet reason though, just to gain the ability to make them on my own. All this water in one place just begged for such dwellers. The exploration to the lake proved me wrong, however. Conversely, the fish were craving me. Or rather, anything that could sense would be devoured by the eyeless Moors. And it was then when I first encountered this strange, nearly see-through animal, which chomped down on the Libra while it was trying to dislodge some dirt from the wall. The fish shape was partially up to the question, as said assailant had a translucent body and much too agile movements. Not to mention the low-light environment which messed up my vision. Yet the hungry teeth that it sported were visible, even too much. Note to self, remember to install both chandeliers and cameras first before expanding, if possible. Anyways, the first attack cut the Libra leg completely off, while the second hooked up under the arm and dragged the poor monster towards the depths. Since the Libras weren't the brightest minions of Yana, it took them a while to recognize the type of danger, or even that there was a danger at all. Translation, I lost 5 more of the same fish before they even started reacting. Well, the bastard was having all-you-can-eat abomination buffet. The problem was the type of the reaction too. Smacking it on the head with clubs was not very effective. The attack simply slid off the translucent scales. I could swear that I saw a grin. It was probably just the way, those teeth. The situation continued until my Libra captain strolled in, and luckily it was chosen next to attack its neck. But after being half-eaten, it managed to place a good enough hit with the crackling mace, and it was enough to paralyze the Frecker for a long enough time. Thanks to my Libras, my drones in joint effort managed to drag it ashore. Now it was my territory, and it was time for the fish to feel helpless. Except nothing happened. No confirmation, lasers, or trump cards. Nope. it just simply died, suffocating, while my minions watched from afar. Anticlimactic. Due to this, I was able to assimilate a very tasty specimen. First, analyze correct me, it was not a fish. Last snake more. The underwater juvenile snake stays competitive, using both translucent body and stronger than steel teeth. While blind, the other senses are used in unnaturally sharp and give it a great advantage when it comes to finding and chasing prey over large distances. Unlike most snakes, Glassmore is not equipped with lungs, but gills instead, and curtails the ability to hunt on land, but otherwise it is an animal perfectly suited for large underground water basins. It lives in packs, and usually the larger specimens tend to grow to a maximum of 2 meters in length, which happens over a course of many years. As aggressive animal, glass snake moors tend to exterminate most of the other life forms in the habitat, and sometimes even cannibalize members of the rodent race, at least until they become a glass progenitor. Threat level D for an individual. Oh ho! So they were made more of them. Wait, weren't there like 20 libras around me? Why can I feel only 15 now? What the hell happened? As I was panicking, another minion disappeared. Yet all this time I saw it all, the soundlessly and nearly comically dragged into the depths, by a 2-meter-long snake no less. I knew not giving them mouths was a mistake. In a moment of terror, I peered down into the lake, brightened the water with my electrical spark, and about 50 slithering forms greeted my gaze. Their twirling forms waited expectantly for something, anything to get close enough to the water. For once, I was glad that my Libras didn't breathe. Retreat, I shouted mentally, and started to retreat myself, reacting to the order of the armored figures, and my minions turned back, slowly and clumsily waddling the way to the destination. As usual, the timer was, however, too lackadaisical of a reaction, and the surrounding snakes were waiting for this moment, and sprang from whatever like cannonballs. Damn accurate cannonballs. But 1 or 2 were even beaten down by a wildly swung club, and the rest were going to the came for sweet, succulent meat of the Libras. As I floated back to the dungeon in a daze, one random thought was knocking around my emptied head. Were the undead even edible? End of chapter. And that concludes today's episode of The Forgotten Dungeon. I hope that you enjoyed. If you'd like to support the channel, there are numerous ways to do so, all of which are listed below. But the easiest way would be to collect forgotten souls, create new dungeons, and force them to like and subscribe my videos. Alright, I hope you all have a good one, and I'll see you all in the next video.